The Charleston County Sheriff's Office is doing everything it can to protect its citizens and officers from coronavirus. I sit down one-on-one with Charleston County Sheriff Al Cannon for this edition of Quintin's Close-Ups. And if you haven't already, follow me on social media and subscribe to my YouTube channel.
Sheriff Al Cannon, welcome back to Quintin's Close-Ups.
And it's good to be back with you, pal.
I appreciate it greatly. Obviously, we know you were the Charleston County Sheriff. I know you've dealt with a lot of TB outbreaks in this jail before.
Well, we've had two in particular over the years, and that experience in working with DHEC, I think has helped prepare us to deal with this, because we have had a lot of protocols in place that, even though this is a new or novel virus, some of the protocols are the same. And in the past, when we've had the TB outbreaks, we had to track inmates and who they had contact with and staff members.
That's right.
So I think that we've been really prepared to the extent anybody could for something like this based on that past experience. But we also, about 2010, when we opened the new facility, actually a couple of years before that, I put in charge of the detention center a guy by the name of Mitch Lucas. And Mitch Lucas got very involved in the American Jail Association, American Corrections Association. In fact, rose to the position of president of the American Jail Association. So being a member of the large jail network, and through him I've met a lot of the jail administrators. We have contacts with folks all over the country. We've been regularly communicating with them in associations like the major county sheriffs. I'm a member of that, and the National Sheriff's Association. And so we are, passing information back and forth to these other jails around the country, and making sure that we are thinking of the things that we need to think of. But beyond that, this is new territory, and so like everybody else, we are working. This actually is a good example of where experience and contacts that I've made and had over the years puts me in a position to communicate with a lot of friends that I have around the country and in various organizations.
Sure.
In fact, Charleston County Sheriff's Office was one of the first that the National Sheriff's Association contacted looking for protocols. Particularly on the law side, we had already policies and procedures in place, and we quickly sat down and in talking with people around the country had already put up some early protocol measures that we were going to put into place. We check each employee when they come into work every morning, check their temperature and make sure that they aren't running a fever, which is one of the big and early symptoms of the coronavirus. And thus far we've I was notified this morning, the second detention officer who has tested positive. She began taking sick leave last Sunday and was tested, and we got the results back, I think, this morning or yesterday afternoon. She makes the second detention officer that's tested positive, and we have a total of 11 inmates, two of which were released early on, that we have been able to identify and segregate, and where it was necessary, put them in isolation. And so I think we've handled it as well as we could. Now we had already identified and been working with the courts and various organizations like probation, pardon, and parole, the Solicitor's Office, Clerk of Court, and the various family court, general sessions court, to identify folks that we could get out either on a very much reduced bond or on a personal recognizance bond. But perhaps more importantly, about 5 years ago, we got actually 2 private grants. We were one of, I think, 11 sites in the country to receive initially $2.5 million, and then a second renewal of that grant for another $2.5 million from a private foundation to look at the inmate population and identify those that we felt really were there more so because they really couldn't afford a bond than necessarily the seriousness of the crime. So we started putting things into place. Now we were the first agency here locally to really concentrate effort on cite and release. So we identified simple possession of marijuana as a leading cause for which folks were being incarcerated. So we and now all of the police departments in Charleston County are using that option when they feel it's appropriate. It gives the police officers and the deputies an option of how to deal with individuals that they encounter on what is now considered to be a low-level minor crime, and so they cite traffic ticket and as opposed to putting them in jail. Some of the other things we've done that I think are really important is we've established and are still working on establishing, but we established a mental health crisis stabilization unit. And so when we encounter folks out there who are committing low-level crimes but have mental episodes, we have a place as an alternative to detention to place them and get them that more immediate attention to their mental health problems. The other thing we do, we're still working on, is a sobering center. Same idea, except with alcohol or substance abuse folks who we encounter out there who are perhaps committing minor crimes but don't really necessitate being placed in jail. So the point of all of that and some of the other things we've done sped up. We having a public defender at the bond hearings to provide the magistrate that's setting the bond with more information about a person that makes him feel comfortable about a low bond or a reduced bond.
Sure.
Now, this does not impact violent crime or violent criminals or individuals that have violent backgrounds. This is only the low-level, non-violent, minor misdemeanors that officers now have an option to incarcerate. So the point of all of that in the context of the coronavirus is that we had already released a lot of the folks that we would have released now because of the virus. We had already done years ago. And that Criminal Justice Coordinating Council that stood up to work that is still working, and community leaders and members of the criminal justice system participate in that. And excuse me. That has helped us in terms of not having as large a inmate population. Our population, which at one time had been over 2,000, and that was at a time when our rated capacity was like 660. Now, when the county authorized and we built the new facility that opened in 2010,
that's right,
and we were able to go back and renovate the earlier. We have a space in there enough for 2,100, and what we've seen since then is a decrease in the inmate population, both as a result of a decrease in crime in general and in some of the measures that we put into place. So our population now runs between, in the last month or so, 800 to 900 people. Now, understand, one of the protocols we all put into place is we told our folks, look, unless it's a really critical safety issue, traffic stop. Let's don't make traffic stops based on minor traffic offenses. We've done that. in anticipation of the potential of having to concentrate on other things, and we have done that. We now provide now SROs who obviously are not in the schools now, are helping us to check the boat ramps and the parks and those sorts of things. Places that food is being distributed and the testing centers, those sorts of things, we help monitor. We've had folks assigned to the islands to assist with their situation. We handled, initially we handled traffic and calls while they were operating the checkpoints, but we've assisted them. So there's been a lot of things that we've been doing as a result of the coronavirus that it's changed our focus
somewhat. And obviously you talk about, the decrease in crime. How is that right now in Charleston County as you see it?
Well, by and large, we have seen, as I think is the case a good bit around the country, a decrease in particularly violent crime. But crime in general, I think it's safe to say, has gone down somewhat.
And you talked earlier about the SROs who are now helping out with far as the islands and the parks and whatnot. How many of those officers have been able to, have had to go out to businesses and give citations?
We have not, to my knowledge, given any citations, and our approach, which I think is very similar to what we see with the other departments in the county and in the state, and that is where we have a complaint or where we come across groups, we encourage them through reason to disband and break up, and that's worked, I think, for the most part. We've not had any real problems.
And lastly, as we sit here, we know that unfortunately Deputy Ledoux passed away, unfortunately due to an incident in the car recently. Traffic accident, that's right. When you look at his career to right now, what still plays in your mind about him?
Well, that he was so young and was just starting out in his career. In the short period of time that he had been with us, he had certainly impressed us all and had made some really close friends. And his family, his dad's a retired police officer from California. They moved here initially to be with Jeremy's sister, who lived here, whose husband's in the Navy, and had a grandchild, and that's key. It's not uncommon to see parents moving to where the grandchildren are. And so they came here, and they're a wonderful family, and we have certainly shared with them our loss. But just a young guy just starting off in his career.
And obviously, say for instance, if someone wants to report a crime to the Charleston County Sheriff's Office right now, what tool are you guys using for that?
Well, there's always 911 if you talk about a crime that's in progress. Otherwise, 202-1700.
Okay.
843-202-1700. And they will get you with somebody. But if it is going on now, it's something that you see that's happening now, dial 911.
Okay. And obviously, let's talk about the homeless. How is the Charleston County Sheriff's Office approaching that situation?
Well, let me tell you, we had a work camp, 96 beds, and we reached a point when the population, we got the new detention facility, we were able to shift those minimum security folks over into the new facility, and that left that work camp vacant. And so what we began doing was offering that as a warming shelter. And we have used that when the weather has gotten cold, and we've had limited use of that in storms, but we've also worked with the city with respect to the homeless challenge they had with the tent city and that sort of stuff. that was not an incarceration. There were folks, and we have in the past used that as a pet-friendly shelter, and so we've put that to use for the community, and helped there to the extent that we could. It's not an ideal situation, but it certainly beats being out in the weather when you don't really have any place else to go. And we have gone and picked people up and brought them back to the warning shelter. We didn't have transportation. We try to be sensitive with that in the facilities that we have. We try to, where possible, make them available. We conduct tours of the detention center too, because for all sorts of people, young kids, 10, 12, maybe even younger, 8. But we take folks on the tour of that, and it is very informative, very instructional. Now, we also, and one of the things I will tell you, I was here and was the sheriff when Hugo came through. And a lot of folks in law enforcement from even Georgia and North Carolina came to South Carolina and Charleston in particular to assist us. When something like that in your life happens, you sort of develop a sense of obligation to pass it on. So we have been very much focused on assisting agencies that don't have the resources that we have been able to develop. We've gotten a lot of funding under Homeland Security and other grants to develop resources those grant funds were given to develop regional resources. And in fact, county council and the governing bodies and funding authorities of the grant recipients had to pass a resolution acknowledging that it was to develop resources that would be used on a regional basis. Sure. That is, we're doing that with our juvenile detention center too. Now, we need a new juvenile detention center. Okay. The alternative would be, and there was an effort, very brief effort on county council, some council members' part years ago to close the juvenile detention center. And that would have forced all the police agencies in the sheriff's office in Charleston County to transport juveniles to Columbia. Sure. And I was opposed to that. And so it did not become an issue, and it still remains open. Charleston County was the first county in the state that had a juvenile detention center. Now, the significance of that is that if you have a juvenile and you have to take them into custody, you have to transport them to Columbia unless you have an alternative. And so what we've seen is that Berkeley County and Dorchester County, rather than driving juveniles to Columbia, place them in our juvenile detention center. We can handle that. Let me tell you, Department of Juvenile Justice is like the Department of Corrections, okay, in the sense that they house predominantly, before 10, 15 years ago, 15, 20 years ago, predominantly convicted individuals, okay? They've already been to trial. Right. There's a significant difference between a prison and a detention center. You detain people until they have been in court. Right? So here's the problem. If we arrested a juvenile and we didn't have a juvenile detention center and we had to transport them to Columbia, okay, that means we would have to go back the next morning to get them and bring them to court. And it also would very likely mean this. Let's say the lawyer wants to talk to his juvenile client. Right? And the lawyer is not likely to go to Columbia to interview him. He's going to have the court order us to go to Columbia and pick him up and bring him back. Very inefficient. Very inefficient. And detention is an entirely different mission than housing convicted, whether it's juveniles or adults. Huge differences between a detention center and a prison. Okay? And so, Mitch Lucas was very instrumental in helping to write the Prison Rape Elimination Act provisions to make sure that the distinctions between a detention center and a prison were recognized and addressed in that legislation. He was also very influential in when the FCC with Minion Clyburn on the issue of the jail and prison telephone fees, and was able to get different rates for jails than prisons. So we have been instrumental on the national level of influencing some of the most important legislation and regulation that's occurred related to jails. And what that does is this. Here's another thing. You take that juvenile to Columbia who has not been adjudicated, that's what they say rather than convicted, by the court yet. You take him to Columbia. He now has no, his family's got to go to Columbia to see him. So they're very likely not going to be able to visit the same as they would be here at the juvenile detention if their loved one was being housed here. So that's another disadvantage of having to take them to Columbia. That sense of community, housing that individual in the community where they live, where their family can visit them, can support them. Excuse me. That's lost if you have to transport people to Columbia. And so those are the kinds of things people don't think about. Those are the practical realities of that issue of whether or not we transport them to Columbia.
And I want to get you back on Quintin's close-up soon to talk about more of this.
Absolutely.
And of course your re-election bid as well.
Right.
So I'll get that when it's appropriate to do that.
Absolutely. Okay, look forward to that.
Yes, sir. And as always, welcome back at the Quintin's close-ups, and hope to have you again.
Appreciate it. It's nice to be here at my old alma mater.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
I graduated, you were telling me here before you were born.
Yes, sir.
1973.
That's right. Exactly right. Yes, sir.
With a Bachelor of Science in Biology.
Wow.